Rabbi Meir Kahane is known for his extremist right-wing views on Judaism and Israel. As founder of the Jewish Defense League, he has led angry and often violent campaigns against Nazism and to publicize the plight of Soviet Jewry. In the last 2 decades, the JDL achieved international notoriety for bombing and shooting attacks on Soviet embassies in the United States and Europe. A former member of the Israeli Knesset, Meir Kahane's policies have been condemned as racist and anti-democratic. But a new book contends he is not an aberration, that Meir Kahane has worked in close alliance with Israeli leaders and even U.S. intelligence. The book is called The False Prophet, Rabbi Meir Kahane from FBI informant to Knesset member. The author is Robert I. Friedman, a staff writer for The Village Voice who has reported frequently from the Middle East. Robert, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you here. This is not a nice Jewish boy.
No, he took the concept of the nice Jewish boy and turned it on its head.
He really did.
Yeah.
He really did. Tell those in the audience who don't know much about Meir Kahane, very briefly, who he is and what he's done.
Well, Rabbi Kahane was in the Knesset from '84 to 1988. The platform of his party is very simple. He ran on the call to throw all the Arabs out of Israel and out of the occupied territories. And he achieved a great deal of support in Israel. In '88, on the eve of the elections, the High Court ruled that his party was racist and he was banned from running. But polls in Israel taken on the eve of the election showed that he was on the verge of capturing 6 to 7 Knesset seats out of 120, which would have made him perhaps the 3rd largest party in the state of Israel.
That's right. In those extremely fragmented politics, 6 or 7 seats surely gets you a seat in the cabinet and great influence. But in fact, his party was ruled essentially racist
the High
and
Court
illegal
said. Yes.
By the Israeli Supreme Court. But Meir Kahane's background and his roots are in this country.
Rabbi Kahane was born in Brooklyn. His father was born in Palestine during the Ottoman Turkish period. Rabbi Kahane grew up during the Holocaust years. He was ordained a rabbi in the early 1950s. He went to law school at NYU. He got an MA in International Affairs. In the middle 1960s, he decided that he and a childhood friend, a man named Joseph Cherba, who's well known in Washington politics, would form a think tank and contract themselves out to intelligence agencies to do research. And as consultants, they, for example, infiltrated the John Birch Society, or so Kahane claims, to find the source of its funding, and they turned over these names to the FBI. Justice Department officials confirmed that it was true, but that Kahane didn't make a great deal of money doing it. At the same time...
That's right. It seems, in fact, that he was a relatively low-level informant rather than a consultant.
That's probably more accurate. It's, yeah. He wasn't on a payroll. He probably got paid, you know, per paper that he wrote.
Was there some issue or event that galvanized him into the violent path that he pursued through the Jewish Defense League?
There's nothing in his childhood that suggests that he would lead a violent course in his life. He grew up very comfortably in Flatbush. His father was a respected rabbi. He himself says that he experienced virtually no contact with anti-Semitism in his childhood years. But his father was a member of the revisionist movement of Zionism headed by Zev Jabotinsky, the famous founder of revisionist Zionism, the second great branch of the Zionist movement. And as Kahane was growing up as a child, Jabotinsky himself was a guest in Rabbi Kahane's home, as was Menachem Begin and Joseph Berg, who was formerly the head of the National Religious Party.
Right, but revisionism doesn't necessarily lead you to violence of the kind that he has been convicted of.
No, it absolutely doesn't. But one thing that Jabotinsky did in the 1920s was he created all over Europe Jewish self-defense units to protect Jews from pogroms in Eastern Europe. And Kahane got the idea of the Jewish Defense League, ostensibly a group in New York that was dedicated to protecting Jews from physical assault, from Jabotinsky's models.
Well, there was that early model, but he took it quite a step further.
He took it quite a step further.
I served in Israel as the correspondent there for the New York Times, and recall meeting Meir Kahane when he came to Israel in the early 70s and became active in politics there, and being struck by the fact that here was a man who combined great charisma, riveting speaking ability, with absolute single-minded determination to pursue his goals without regard to the consequences. There's a line in your book quoting him as saying, "I can't allow Zionism to be sacrificed on the altar of democracy."
Yes.
In other words, for him, his goals came first and all others were to be blown away.
And he constantly says that Zionism and democracy are mutually exclusive, and that's appealing to some people in Israel. It's a call to expel Arabs. If you have, in a Jewish state, 3.5 million Jews and 2.5 million Arabs, over the course of time with a higher Arab birth rate, the Arabs will either equal the number of Jews living in the state of Israel or will become a greater number in the population. So Kahane says to save Israel, to save Zionism, there's a simple solution. That is to expel the Arabs from Israel. They have 21 other Arab countries where they can go to, and it doesn't matter to him that they may have resided there in their ancestral homes for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Now, of course...
What percentage of Israelis do you think endorse that view?
Well, in 1988, just before the Knesset elections, polls indicated that Kahane, had he been able to run, would have garnered, 6 to 7 seats. He has, his constituency then went over to the Likud party or to Tehillah or to other religious parties on the right that advocate some views that are similar to Rabbi Kahane's. He has enormous appeal in Israel among Sephardic Jews, Jews that came from Oriental or Islamic countries who grew up in the Arab world or the Islamic world and who were not treated well by and large and have a grudge against Arabs.
So he and his ideas remain a factor to be dealt with. We're in the midst of a conversation with Robert I. Friedman, journalist and author of a new book on Rabbi Meir Kahane, the extremist leader of the Jewish Defense League. And tell me a little about him personally. I mean, you write in the book that he seemed to be have a megalomaniac strain in him that was, and that he was fascinated with sex, with power, with violence.
Yeah, his politics aren't nice, and he personally isn't isn't really a nice man. He is a megalomaniac. Which is his Achilles heel, the fact that his ego is so large that he doesn't know how to work with other people, and Israel's very lucky that his ego is so large.
You said that he's preoccupied, for example, with the notions of Arab men seducing Jewish women in Israel. I mean, what lies behind this?
I met him first in 1979, and he had just come back from Hebrew University, where he had spent the day plastering posters in Hebrew and in English on dormitory walls and on the cafeteria, warning Jewish women from the United States who were doing their studies at the Hebrew University to beware of nice-looking men speaking English with slight accents who may not really be Israelis, but perhaps were Arabs. So he suggested in the documents that he plastered on the walls that women should ask to see identification cards before they had relations with these men, because perhaps they were actually Arabs. He's obsessed with his own sexual desires. He had an affair in 1966 with a young model named Donna Estelle Evans. She knew him only as Martin King, the name he worked under with Joseph Churba when they were infiltrating these little extremist groups for the FBI. And they were scheduled to be married on Rabbi Kahane's birthday, August 1st, 1966, a few days before their scheduled marriage. Of course, meanwhile, his name was really Rabbi Kahane. He had a wife, 2 children in Laurelton, Queens. 3 days before their scheduled marriage, he sent her a dear John letter and told her that he was a rabbi, that he was married, that he had 2 children. And she became so distraught that she went to the Queensboro Bridge with a friend of hers and leaped off the bridge 186 feet and died the next day in hospital from internal injuries. The New York Times uncovered this story. Michael Kaufman, a great reporter, is currently the assistant foreign editor of the paper, and Richard Severo, another great reporter. And
tell me that story, because it's a very curious one.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they uncovered all this information, and then they took it to the then top editors of the paper, Abe Rosenthal and Arthur Gelb, and discussed it with them at they knew it was a very sensitive and explosive discovery they'd come across.
They knew it was, at the time when Michael Kaufman was doing the story, it was January 1971, and the JDL was already a front page item in the New York Times and the Washington Post. They were in the middle of their anti-Soviet campaign, and there were a number of bombing and shooting attacks that had been attributed to the Jewish Defense League, so they were a major concern of law enforcement in New York City and to the federal government, because they were going after Soviet diplomats and Soviet facilities. So the Times assigned Michael Kaufman, then a young reporter, to find out who Kahane really was and who was really supporting him. And he went to interview Kahane and thumbed through some of the JDL literature and found in a JDL magazine an advertisement for the Don Estelle Evans Foundation. And he asked Rabbi Kahane who this woman was. And Kahane said it was a secretary, someone who died tragically, and they set up a foundation in her name, and that the money that they collected through this foundation was sent to Israel to Jewish orphans. Kaufman kept digging with Richard Severo and found that indeed the woman was his lover who committed suicide after he broke off the affair. The reporters traveled to Bridgeport, Connecticut, where the woman's parents lived, and showed them a picture of Rabbi Kahane. They knew who he was. They knew him by his pseudonym Michael King. They went to Joseph Cherba, Kahane's partner, and he admitted that they were having a physical relationship. And then they confronted Kahane a few days later at the David Susskind studio after Rabbi Kahane was done taping a show. And they confronted him with the evidence. They had the goods on him. And he broke down and unburdened himself completely to the two startled reporters and said, yes, I met her in a bar. I had a relationship with her. I loved her. I wanted to marry her, but I couldn't. I'm an Orthodox rabbi. I came to my senses in the end. Please don't print this. I'll leave politics forever. I'll go to Israel. Please don't tell my wife. This will ruin me. So the two reporters went back to talk to their editors, Arthur Gelb, and Michael had already composed a lead in which Rabbi Kahane was seen kneeling at the gravesite of this young woman, placing flowers on her grave, which he did for the few years after her death. And they told him to take that out of the lead, that it violated the Times Code of Standards and Practices. Now, Richard Severo has a different version. Richard Severo says that references to the physical relationship with this woman were deleted because it could arouse anti-Semitism, and that the paper made a mistake. Michael Kaufman said that it had nothing to do with it, that it was merely the way things were reported at the time. Arthur Gelb said, in the 60s, we knew all kinds of things. We reporters knew all kinds of things about the Kennedys.
But you suspect there was a larger motive?
Well, I didn't say that in the book. I don't want to judge the way the Times handled the story. Richard Severo says that if we had printed at the time everything that we knew about Rabbi Kahane, perhaps the Jewish Defense League would have been destroyed, because it was basically supported by Orthodox Jews that would have been appalled by an Orthodox rabbi behaving this way, and perhaps then we as the Times could have saved Israel from so much future anguish from Kahane and Kahaneism and his abhorrent racist politics. And I lean towards Richard Severo's.
Okay. We are talking about Rabbi Meir Kahane, his politics, his extremism, his life, and his impact on both Israel and through the Jewish Defense League, sometimes in this country as well. In fact, there's a case, there's a murder case involving Alex O'Day, in which there are some very, very sensational notions about the Jewish Defense League's role and about the Israel government's role in perhaps shielding it. Tell us about that. Tell us about the case.
Well, briefly, in 1985, there were 7 bombings across the United States that resulted in the deaths of 2 people and the injury of 7 others. One of those who died in a bombing in Santa Ana, California, was Alex Oda, the Western Regional Director of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee. According to the FBI, these bombings were the work of the Jewish Defense League. The FBI has identified the suspects, 3 American-born Jews, now living 2 in Jerusalem, 1 in Kiryat Arba, the largest West Bank settlement. All of them are close to Rabbi Kahane.
Has the U.S. sought the extradition of these 3?
No, the U.S. hasn't sought none of the 3 have been indicted. They've been named as suspects in FBI documents and in grand jury proceedings. One of them, Robert Manning of Kiryat Arba, has been indicted in another murder, a kill for hire in 1980. an assassination of a secretary in a real estate office. According to documents that I uncovered, the Justice Department says that the Israeli government is obstructing the FBI's investigation, that the FBI's requests for information about the suspects, telephone logs, surveillance reports, everything that police need to make a case have been denied by the government of Israel, although in other terrorism matters, obviously, the government of Israel and the U.S. government work very closely in combating international terrorism on this matter.
Well, have you gone to the Israel government about this and asked them?
Yeah, the Justice Ministry says that until the three men are indicted, that there's nothing they can do. However, Robert Manning has been indicted in an unrelated but other murder case. The request for extradition is sitting in Jerusalem on the Justice Minister's desk, and the reason why they don't arrest him is because he resides in Kiryat Arba, and the State Department specifically stipulated that they don't want the Israeli government to arrest him in the occupied territories because the U.S. government doesn't recognize Israel's judicial hold over the occupied territories. And
so it's a real catch-22.
Yeah, the government of Israel claims it doesn't have the manpower to surveil and wait until he comes back into Israel, which he does every day for business.
So it's not really plausible.
No, it's not plausible at all.
Yeah.
They could have him if they wanted him in a second.
What would be their motive in protecting him?
Well, I don't think it's that they want to protect him, but in Israel, these three gentlemen have been accused of murdering a convicted Nazi who illegally came to our country, and an Arab American supporter of the PLO. Many people in Israel think that Arab American supporters of the PLO and Nazis are synonymous, and there would be a great deal of reaction by right-wing politicians in Israel if these three men were extradited back to the United States.
Is there any evidence of Kahane's role in this, or responsibility?
According to Justice Department spokespeople that I've talked to, and FBI people that are handling the investigation, Kahane was in America during the three bombings and was seen with the three suspects before and after the bombing, and that's all I know about Kahane's role. He, according to the U.S. Attorney in Brooklyn, he is being investigated for the bombings. Rabbi Kahane is being investigated for the bombings.
Well, Kahane is having his own problems right now in Israel, is he not?
Rabbi Kahane in January of this year was indicted in Israel for sedition. He made a speech after an act of Arab terrorism in which he called on the people of Israel to physically liquidate the Arab cancer in their midst. He said this in front of 1,000 people in downtown West Jerusalem, and his followers went wild, attacking Arabs across the country, creating injuries. And 6 months after that speech, the government of Israel indicted Rabbi Kahane for sedition. The trial started in April. It's going on now. It's Kahane's second trial for sedition. In the early 1970s, he was tried by the government of Israel for sedition after writing Arabs in Israel letters requesting them to leave the country, and he would help pay for them. His lawyer told the judge that he would gladly bring in the 3,000 Arabs to vouch for Rabbi Kahane, and in fact that Rabbi Kahane wasn't saying anything differently than other Zionist leaders had said in the past. And he said, furthermore, Judge, if anything incites Arabs in this country, it's the fact that we exist as a Jewish state. The judge dismissed the case.
So this case, the sedition trial, still goes on?
It still goes on now as we speak.
And since he's in legal trouble, and his party has been ruled illegal.
Yes.
He's no longer in the Knesset. What's the impact today of Meir Kahane and his ideas on Israel politics?
Well, Rabbi Kahane still serves as a catalyst. He still says things in Israel that provoke other people to act. He comes to the United States about 5 times a year. He was here for the entire month of March, traveling around the country, appearing on television and radio talk shows, raising money. He's still very successful at raising money in this country through a variety of 501c3 charitable tax-exempt organizations that he's set up. He takes the money back with him and uses it for his political program. It doesn't look like he'll ever be allowed to run again for the Knesset, although he claims that the next time that there are elections, he's going to run again. He'll change the name of his party, that he bases everything he says and does on quotes from the Bible or the halacha, Jewish religious law. And he'll go to the High Court again and appeal his case and see if he can run. If he is able to run again for the Knesset, the chances are that he'll do very well.
And even if he doesn't, are there others who would pick up his concepts, his ideas, and run with them?
Well, sure, because his concept of throwing the Arabs out of Israel have already been co-opted by so-called mainstream politicians on the right. There's a party now sitting in the Knesset called Modelet, run by a general by the nickname of Gandhi, who comes out of the Labor Party, and his sole his sole concept is to throw the Arabs out of Israel.
Right. Gandhi, a former chief of staff, army chief of staff, is really the rigid right of Israel politics.
Yes.
What's the popular view of Kahane now in Israel? How do most Israelis see him?
If you ask most educated Israelis on the right and the left, what they think of Kahane, they'll say that he's a vile aberration, and then they usually don't want to talk about him anymore. Kahane is banned from appearing on Israeli television. He's banned from being interviewed on Israeli state-run radio. He's banned from entering Israeli high schools and Israeli universities. He's banned from stepping foot on Israeli army bases. The government of Israel has done everything that it can do to delegitimize Kahane and Kahaneism. They've set up whole courses in high school to talk about nothing other than Kahaneism and the threat that it represents to Zionism and to the Jewish people. On the other hand, if you walk with Kahane into a shopping mall or into a Jewish souk, a bazaar, where they sell food and clothes
in Jerusalem,
Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv or in Haifa, he's surrounded by screaming admirers who put them on his shoulders and love him and clap his back.
A demagogue often is.
Yes.
Robert, thanks very much for telling us about him.
Thanks.
Fascinating tale, fascinating book. Stay with us. Nightwatch will be back after a short break.